Just like to, on behalf of Dairy Australia and DEPI and Melbourne University, welcome Lawrence Clerk here this morning. So we've grabbed the opportunity to link in with the NCDA Alliance Partners meeting, which is terrific because we wanted to engage with the NCDA, but the fact that you're all here today has just made it even better, I think. So Lawrence comes to us with a wealth of knowledge and expertise around agricultural innovation systems. And I'm not going to try and define what they are, but I just want him to share with us some of his views around what they might be, because I've got a suspicion we're all part of it.
You're part of it, yeah, definitely.
So, so we'll hand over to you, but I do need to acknowledge and thank Melbourne University and DEPI who have sponsored Lawrence's visit here for last week and for this week as well. Yeah. So 2 weeks in Australia, which has been terrific. So to get the opportunity this morning is much appreciated. So I think I'll just hand over to you, Lawrence.
Okay, yes. I'll do my best to speak proper English. I might throw in a Dunglish word here and there, but you'll probably can make something out of that. So I'm going to talk about agricultural innovation systems, which is a new concept on the scene, which is about a different way of understanding innovation as a multi-stakeholder process going way beyond just RD&E. RD&E is a component of it, but it's not the whole innovation system. And actually, this is where we got in terms of understanding innovation. It's about what we learned from practice, how innovation really works, and we try to fit that into a new perspective. So that does not mean that the older perspectives like the fusion and adoption perspectives are bad, but they just didn't explain everything what makes innovation happen. My presentation today is very much focused on the dairy sector, because I'm here at Dairy Australia. So the main purpose is, it used to work, to give a very brief introduction of the AIS perspective. It's not very theoretical. And then just some examples of stimulating AIS collaboration, collaboration of multiple players in the agricultural sector, and then especially the dairy sector. So, mainly summarizing this thinking behind AIS. And so AIS sees innovation as not just good ideas, inventions and R&D. It tends to see innovation as the outcome of interactions between multiple actors, and it's about getting value from an invention or getting value from a new way of organizing. And so in this perspective, it's not that the innovation is created in the lab and then brought out to the sector, and when it leaves the lab it's already an innovation. No, then it's an invention, it's a technology. Only when it's brought to use, then it becomes an innovation, because then it delivers value. Otherwise it just might stay on the shelf. And is that innovation? No, because we haven't changed the way we work, we haven't changed the way we reap benefits from a new way of working and a new technology. Also an important thing to realize is that the innovation perspective under agricultural innovation systems thinking is very much about social, institutional and organizational restructuring. So it's not just about hardware, technologies, artifacts, new machine, milking robots, but it's very much about what we call orgware. There are lots of efforts to introduce automatic milking here in Australia. But to do that, you might need to change the financing structure of farms. You might need to change the quality control system, because maybe the way automatic milking works does not produce the same results as hand-based milking with a conventional milking machine. So you might have to also change your standards. And unless you change standards, you won't get the automatic milking device accepted on the farm, because it's not logical for farmers to adopt. Often in the adoption perspective, it's about, once a farmer knows and is informed about new technologies, adoption will occur. But often farmers know and they want to adopt, but they're just not allowed by their environment. So here in this agriculture innovation systems perspective, this interaction between people who want to innovate in their environment and changing the environment to enable change is a very important thing. So it goes beyond linearity and pipeline thinking. Of course, there's still pipelines in there, but sometimes you have to take a step back in the pipeline, and the pipeline is not like this, but the pipeline is like, it goes all like this, and takes a turn back. That's the pipeline under agriculture innovation systems thinking. So that also very much recognizes that innovation is a very unpredictable and risky search process, and you might also have failure. But what is a failure in one process, if you look at it from a broader perspective and a longer time horizon, might have been very crucial for follow-up later on. Of course, that is not what funders want to hear, because they want to have success. They want to see return on their investment, but this is just what happens in innovation. So also to better feed this interactive process and to be able to be adaptive and take into account all kinds of influences within this broader environment in which innovation takes place. It's about multiple types of persons and organizations. So it's really working on change in networks. So this goes beyond your typical team of researchers, extensionists and farmers. It involves all kinds of actors in society. So this has been captured within this definition of agricultural innovation systems, which is basically about a network of different types of players who work together to bring new processes, products into being, and also that these have some kind of economic value, but you might even say if they have a value for society in terms of public goods, that would also fit under this definition in my view. And it's really also about looking at institutions and policies. It's about the incentives that are there to make people collaborate about innovation, that you think very explicitly about that. But also it's about seeing institutional change as a prerequisite for innovation. So people have tried to capture it in a nice scheme, so that there's still some kind of order in it, but I think you just should see it as like a blurry network scheme instead of this nice and ordered scheme. But you see here still the RD&E system, so you see agriculture, education, research, the bridging institutions, they would be extension, they're here. But they interact with the whole value chain, so this is already broadened to all those actors, and not just the agricultural producers, which are important in the supply chain. It's also about agricultural innovation policies, investments, being an essential part of this innovation network. And here you really see these roles of institutions. And so it's really about how a complex system interacts to produce innovations. So agricultural innovation systems thinking emphasizes the need to consider the full chain and create interaction throughout the chain at different stages in the innovation process. So you have to set the agenda with multiple players, because they all have something to win or lose in innovation. They all provide their own little piece of expertise in the innovation process. But you should also keep them involved during the process, because they will come into play at some point. It's not just about one happy family doing a kind of a family tour and doing all stuff in every step together, but you need to engage people actively to be able to anticipate on their role in the innovation. So that is really the main change in thinking. It's this comprehensiveness of looking who matters for innovation. So making AIS work is not easy. You need new roles for research and extension, because they need to work in a much more interactive and demand-driven way. They need to really engage with the players in the supply chain. And for that, sometimes a mindset change is needed. Researchers sometimes got used to them determining what was interesting, them determining what type of research was needed. Also seeing research still as kind of the main input to innovation, but if you work much more from a demand-driven perspective, you look very broadly at what are the barriers for change, and is it really research that should solve it. I have an example of a program we had in Africa. It was about cocoa, and it was about best practices in cocoa. This has nothing to do with dairy, but all the technologies were available to improve it. So the research was done, and the outcomes were there, but nothing changed. And it was basically because they didn't have a good system for grading the weighing scales of the traders. So there was lots of cheating in the value chain. So not a single farmer wanted to invest in improving practices and bringing that research knowledge to use, because they just didn't reap the benefits from them. So to really enable better research, and also having impact of research, they needed to get kind of a certification mechanisms for the weighing scales. It's a very basic thing, but those things really matter for innovation. And so that also, in this example, is about making connections with different types of organizations. And then you have to engage with the standard setters, and that they are not your average actor you would think about to engage in an innovation process. And so sometimes people also don't know how to find them, so that sometimes needs to be enabled by others. And also what is important is that innovation challenges the status quo. So it involves disagreement and conflict, so it's not easy to get convergence. You can bring actors together, but they probably will have other ideas about how they would want to innovate, and sometimes they're really not in favor of innovation, and you need to get some convergence. So, and making this AIS work is not easy. So what we've seen in my country at least, and you also see it popping up in other places, and it's probably already done here. In fact, I did a paper with Ruth Nettle from Melbourne and looking at many Dairy Australia programs, and you see that this type of matchmaking, brokering, facilitation is being done, but it's a little bit under the radar, and some people that are in that network take up the roles, but it's not really an explicit role. But you see that from innovation studies, this concept of innovation brokers has emerged, and this is an organization which merely is there to enable other organizations to innovate. So they don't provide a real input to the innovation process in the sense of knowledge or funding, or they have a real interest in the outcome set, that they are kind of a company reaping the benefits of making a new product, but they just make sure that all these actors can come together and can work together because they develop a shared language, they have kind of a common vision, so they're really enablers of innovation. And I put this picture of a spider there. Why I did that? Well, it's obvious. They kind of make the web of innovation, but they're also a bug. You have some pretty venomous ones here in the Netherlands. Art spiders are quite innocent. They never kill, but sometimes you just need to kill. You need to get have the guys. Sometimes you need to get the guys out who really are blocking innovation, or you just need to be nasty to them, and that has to do with innovation as a negotiation process. And not everybody will like it. So also sometimes you really have to put up a mirror and say, isn't it your own attitude which is blocking progress? For example, saying to Dairy Australia, yeah, you guys, you're moaning about that research doesn't have impact, but what you want from the researchers is that they produce publications. That doesn't really stimulate collaboration with stakeholders. So it's also really trying to make people reflect on their position in innovation processes. So what are these innovation broker functions? It's connecting demand and supply in the knowledge infrastructure, or the RD&E system. And in some other contexts, this has been called seekers and solvers. There's a concept called open innovation, which is about big companies, instead of doing the whole product development process internally, they collaborate with other companies. It would be Samsung collaborating with Siemens instead of doing everything in-house, because each company has its own assets. And there are these organizations out there, they're usually internet-based, which just basically they offer the possibility for people looking for a certain technology or a certain solution to connect them with solvers all around the planet. So there's kind of a virtual marketplace for ideas and solutions. So that's one form of these innovation brokers. But in the agricultural sector, they're more focused on connecting demand and supply between research, extension, and farmers and other parties, and also forging these linkages in the broader innovation system. So when there's kind of an institutional barrier, for example, planning regulations do not really foster the emergence of new farming systems, then you should engage with the planners and show them that they need to change their act in order to be able to get that new system there on the ground. So that's what these people do. So they do visioning and demand supply or articulation. They're kind of the compass for innovation. They help to build the networks, and they provide the reflection. And what we've seen in the Netherlands, they have emerged at a national level, a regional level, sometimes in sectors. And often they were publicly, privately funded. So they were funded by the sectors themselves, because the sectors recognize we need kind of this lubricant, this spark plug for networks. I would say it's very much a collective function. It is kind of repairing system failures. As a government repairs market failures, these actors, they repair system failures that people don't know how to find each other and cannot collaborate. So some cases in the Dutch dairy sector. Some are really more focused still on the farmer level. Others have really a more broad systemic level. But the nice thing is they tend to also collaborate amongst each other, so to make sure that also lessons which are being learned in the farmer networks are being upscaled, so to say, to the overall level. So if they would find a barrier in terms of innovation which is more maybe of a policy nature, and they know that in many farmer networks they make sure that others that work more on the policy level get to know that, so that they can start working on that. So I'll talk about these brokers. The background of their emergence is the full privatization of the RD&E system, also a shift from a more supply-driven agriculture, just producing what the sector liked, to really responding to the demands of the consumers and of the citizens, so producing in a cleaner way, also fostering different functions, farmers taking care of the landscape. You had something here with land care, that would be an example of that. Also farmers listening much better to the type of products, for example, making much more tasty tomatoes, because that's what the public wants, making little tiny tomatoes which you can sell at schools as a snack, to get rid of the candy machine. They were really starting to listen to their customers in the dairy sector, omega-3 milk, that kind of stuff, really looking where are the demands and how can we link to that. So that also entails different knowledge demands. You really have to look, okay, how can we solve the knowledge gaps? New players needed to be considered, animal welfare organizations, environmental organizations. And also, and this took place in the 90s and at the start of the millennium, the policy focus changed from taking care of, pampering farmers, more or less, to you should, determine your own strategy. We as a government will try to facilitate that, but you have to look for your own knowledge, you will have to pay for it, you have to pay for all the innovation support services yourself. And that was not easy for farmers. Farmers had to get used to becoming what we call a critical consumer of innovation support services. And it's an experience good, a service is an experience good. You don't know that the hairdresser is bad until you got orange hair and it's, it's long here and short here. So it's not easy to access beforehand. So these brokers also try to do kind of a quality check on behalf of the farmers. So the first example, the Dairy Farming Academy. That's kind of a revamping of this network perspective on farmers learning. We've had that for a long time in the Netherlands, but it tended to be very regional based and also very much based on everyday experiences and not really supporting strategy development and also incorporating the new demands of profit, planet and people. And so it was also there to enhance a more responsible dairy farming. So the idea was to really get farmers out of their comfort zone, really, make them work on exciting topics, and also stimulating that by getting inspirational entrepreneurs from other sectors, from manufacturing, from food processing, also learning how are people doing that in other places, because the farm sector tends to be a little bit, a closed world. They like to interact amongst themselves, but you can get great stuff from outside. And the founders of this Dairy Farming Academy really recognized that. To still keep it very grounded in farmers' reality, they trained the farmers themselves, so not the advisors, as the facilitators. So the research and advisors really became resource persons. And I noted that there's a working group here on education who are more or less forced to listen to this presentation. I'm sorry that I interrupt your meeting. But an interesting thing is that this Dairy Farming Academy at some point started with the Junior Dairy Farming Academy. And that was really creating kind of a apprenticeship system in which you had a very nice matchmaking between students and dairy farmers, and also the students working on their own topics and looking at how could they learn from the more experienced farmers, also to make sure that the curricula really meet the demands of the sectors. So that was an interesting spin-off of this original idea. They called it the Junior Dairy Farming Academy. So this is just one example. And the idea was, if we really have farmers working on these new innovative aspects, we will also learn much better what are the knowledge gaps that can feed into our innovation agendas. I did some research for our Dairy Netherlands. They had huge troubles with their demand articulation process, so they They got the questions at the beginning, but they didn't answer the questions because through their decision-making process, they really went into another direction than what farmers really wanted. And they, for example, used this dairy farming academy. They used what they called germination meetings for getting really the good ideas to inform their own agenda. So it also fed into other places in the innovation system. So it was not just farmer learning. Another example, a bit similar to this, is called Networks in Animal Husbandry. And it was also having a yearly call, and the farmers, they might be working already for a time on a certain topic, and they have all kinds of barriers, they have knowledge gaps, but they have no support for that because it's very hard to get into kind of the overall agenda. And the idea was we should then broker networks around a commonly felt challenge by a group of farmers. It was usually just 3, 4, 5 farmers. For example, how to get more out of your goat milk or something like that, or of your cow milk, or can't we do something with innovative flooring? And we've been experimenting with different types of flooring in our stables, but we lack some robust knowledge to support our claims. Then they could get in touch with research, because the researchers were real tools as facilitators, so not just giving the answer or imposing their own ideas, but really accompanying them in their search process, linking them to all kinds of other possible sources of knowledge, and when needed also generating new knowledge. So this is really putting the farmers in at the steering wheel of this innovation process and really connecting research to that. So this was a pilot from 2003 until 2007, but it's now continued, and there's a yearly call, and government still funds that because they see it as important. Then going to mastitis, that's always an issue in all dairy sectors. I think you had here countdown down under, isn't it? Yeah, this is our countdown down under. It's the Udder Health Center in Netherlands. This is the Dutch acronym. And in the Netherlands we have a fully privatized advisory system, so government doesn't have any tools anymore to plug in advice on these types of issues. It's still a question, is it advice what you need, or is it just institutional reconfiguration? Because apparently when the dairy industry would have been a little bit more strict on its fines and would have had a slightly lower tolerance for the maximum cell count, then probably they would have had better results instead of pumping lots of money in training farmers on it, because often they were kind of aware of it already, but they just didn't do it because they didn't see serious repercussions in surpassing the norms. But the idea was we have to reduce the cell count, and so we have to stimulate this market for services on this topic, increasing the pool, so creating awareness through all kinds of nice campaigns. And also by providing a financial incentive, but here it was rather kind of a negative incentive, or it was not really kind of a proactive incentive, giving money to buy advice, but mainly saying, yeah, we'll have fewer losses, you will get less fines. And they also had what they called an Udder Health award. They could get a sum of money if they proved to be the best farmer with the lowest cell count, the lowest problem, also as an inspiration for other farmers. So this way they try to enhance the pool so that farmers would start to ask for advice much more proactively. And they also did advisor capacity building. They identified the veterinarian as the main trustworthy person when it comes to animal health issues. They did not really consider that the veterinarian is not a proactive advisor. He tends to have a curative orientation. So this also meant, retooling the veterinarian and changing his or her professional identity, so that they dare to start up a conversation instead of, yeah, I'll come and I'll plug in some antibiotics, saying, wouldn't it be good next time that you start wearing these gloves, because then you can prevent me from coming here, which also is actually ruining his own business in a sense. So they really worked on empowering the veterinarians to take this role, and also getting much better connection between the latest research knowledge and that advisory system. So they also work with the schools, the veterinary schools, to change their curriculum to have this advisory role much better catered for. Looking in hindsight, they probably would have made a better choice going to the feed advisor. It's not the most obvious choice, but the feed advisor does much more farm management planning, so that might have been a better choice. This is also about learning and maybe adapting your programs whilst they're going. So this was really more like an advisory thing, but this really goes into innovation systems thinking in a full-blown way, because this is really about how to change complete systems, which means connecting the production system also to the value chain. It's creating a different type of milk with enhanced values like enhanced animal welfare, enhanced environmental value, which generally has a higher price. So you then also will need to engage with the supermarket chains, with the NGOs, to be able to market that and to create kind of this value proposition for this. And this is what they try to do in this project called Cow Power. And they work with a method called interactive reflective design. And that was basically about saying, we, in our current production system, we are locked in. There are all kinds of what we call perverse linkages. It's about the system as a whole being unable to move because it just got stuck. So it's about farmers saying, yeah, we don't like the way we're producing, but we're forced to produce this way in a very industrial way because we get low prices and nobody wants to pay more for it. And the supermarket says, yeah, we would love to have more animal welfare, but yeah, it's the consumer, they don't want to pay for it. And the consumer, they talk a lot outside the supermarket about animal welfare, but when they make the choice, they go for the cheapest milk. And so they really decided we have to diagnose those challenges, but then we should not just patch it and say, okay, let's work on all these problems. No, we should take that into considerations. We have these problems, but what should then the ideal system look like? And what types of values should it incorporate? So looking at the desired future, and doing that with the whole range of people, visionary farmers, citizens, the cows, the supermarkets, the cows, of course, true scientists, because the cows, they are not capable of talking yet. You never know. And then translating that really into concrete briefs of requirements, so really following this design approach like they would do in new product development, translating that into all kinds of design concepts, through all kinds of functional diagrams, etc. This is all tech language, I won't go into that. And then make detailed proposals for alternative systems. And then the idea would be that you then create kind of niches, networks of people who start working on that, not necessarily to create a niche market, but to create seeds of transition to change the incumbent system. And also to make this reality, well, it hasn't happened yet in dairy. It's also then about engaging some innovative people who take ownership and start working on experimenting with this, making this reality. So what does this look like? This is an example of one of the 4 designs. So this is taking the typical Dutch farms and reconfiguring the way they do. They use the paddocks, the type of stable design, incorporating maybe also other functions, other types of flooring, etc. I can share the report with you if you would like that. That you can read a little bit more about it. And another one is called the Bronk. This also connects to, has some typical names for landscape types in the Netherlands. And so this is a whole different setting. It's about organizing farms in different ways. And this goes together with the program of demand, in which all the components are described in detail with specification, also supported by evidence. So it comes with references, etc. That is not all bogus, but it's potentially, it can be realized. So is this fantasy? This was an earlier effort in the poultry sector, in which they created this Darth Vader battle station, aka UFO crazy thing. And I would say it's a fantasy come true, because this crazy system, how it was designed, I think it was just coincident it became round. But it's there, it has a nice fit into the landscape. It incorporates kind of animal welfare values, but not with the risks of open systems, because it's still a confinement system, but it has some indoor grass. It has also a nice outdoor area. It's really interesting because it recombines different technologies. So the poultry sector took milking carousel technology from the dairy sector to create a manure drying carousel in the middle, using a chimney effect to dry the manure and get rid of the excess weight to get it out much more easy. They created a known brand for welfare enhanced eggs, private label of one of our leading supermarket chains. This is the market leader, Albert Heijn, who has them in the shelves. They're still there. They were introduced 3 years ago. They're still there, so they must make some profit out of it. Otherwise, they would get it out within 3 months probably. And in this process, it was really about these guys. It was a system developer of poultry systems together initially with an egg packer. They worked together with the NGOs. They have a welfare certification. They also created a new way of working with farmers, not the farming just buying the system and then selling the eggs to the egg packer, but they have a joint venture with the system builder. They have a particular type of contract with the supermarket. So it's also the social restructuring, making essentially better profits for farmers and a different position in the value chain. So this can be very inspirational. But here the researchers clearly did not take the problem-solving approach, the design approach, and also it was about unconventional multidisciplinary teams, having a ethological scientist, behavioral scientist, whatever you call it. We call it ethology, but anyway. Together with a philosopher, together with a animal husbandry system professor. So also having really interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary collaboration.
Can I just see if we've got some questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
You describe systems there with multiple players and things like that,
yeah.
which is what we live and breathe to, I think.
Yeah.
So I reckon it might be worth seeing if there's any questions in the room at the moment.
They're flabbergasted. It's a Dunglish.
We've got one on the back.
Yeah.
The interaction you have with the farming community and people like Friesland Campina with their new research center and NISO, and how does that interaction work so that the farmer who is producing milk that the companies want and can make the new products of the future?
Yeah.
The link between
Well, there you have a good.
the organization?
There you have an interesting issue, because there you also see kind of the conflictive nature of innovation. Many of these initiatives try to get the dairy processors involved, but they are a bit reluctant because they see their position threatened as the guys that add the value instead of the farmer adding the value. So they have tried to engage with them, and they do put them in these efforts, but they are not really in favor of these types of changes. But they do try to link up to them. But they are involved, they are invited, but often they take quite a passive position in these types of networks, just because they just want to have the farmer as a supplier and not as a critical innovator coming up with added value directly on the farm. But this is also the thing of innovation systems thinking. Innovation systems, we talked about it before, it's kind of the capacity of society, of a sector to innovate. So the AIS is a sectoral innovation system, and this is kind of the sub-sectoral innovation system, because dairy sector is a sub-sector of the overall agricultural sector. And what you see is that as an innovation system, you have to maintain kind of the capacity to innovate incrementally, but also the capacity to radically change the system for the future. And that is kind of a tension, because innovating incrementally, so just improving the dairy product and adding value in the processing stage, that goes that works very well, and there this interaction between Friesland Campina with Wageningen works perfectly. But does that also bring up the new business models of the future? There you need these types of efforts, and you also need to create space for that within your innovation system to enable that. So scholars of innovation have called this dual track governance, and this is quite a challenging thing also for funders. Keeping the current system going and solving the problems, but at the same time thinking about the future and getting the crazy stuff out there to create alternatives for the future. I don't know whether this answers your question to some extent. Not really. Yeah. Yeah.
Karen, did you have a question around the education extension?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll come back.
Yeah.
I'm interested in around the world how education and extension coexist.
Coexist.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by coexist? Do they tend to not like each other? Or
Work together.
You tell me.
Are they actually different? Like I know in a lot of parts of the world, extension actually encompasses education as well. So
yeah, well, we
talk about them separately.
Well, we have rebranded extension as being advisory services. So mainly the whole array of services needed to run a farm properly, and we really see the education as something happening in the schools. So if we think about education, it's about training the graduates to be prepared to have a career as an advisor or as a participant within industry. What we did note there is that education became disconnected from industry and from advisory practice, especially after the privatization. Before, there used to be very natural feedback loops between research, extension, practice and education. So we've seen some initiatives which specifically work on the practice education interface. So we've had one initiative called the Green Knowledge Cooperative, which was about much better embedding education institutes and their students within ongoing research projects to also learn from that and to feed in that research knowledge into the education system to improve the curricula, but also to get this fresh knowledge from the students into the research project. We've had an initiative which is called the Content Broker, mainly helping to make up-to-date education packages for the school so that the teachers can use them, especially within the vocational education, which is more the practically oriented education. But in terms of advisory services being also having an education function, the advisory companies still do courses for farmers, they do field days, but we really see that more as advisory work, and when we think about education it's about schools. So we had problems there, but we try to fix them by putting in people who try to make the connection.
Maybe going to talk about this later.
Yeah.
Also after later. But how do you measure benefits or success in the systems approach?
Yeah, well, there you have a good issue, because these processes are much more fuzzy and do not really relate to discrete components which you can measure easily. Actually, the innovation scientist community is still quite poor in its evaluation methods to capture innovation systems working. The traditional indicators like patents and R&D expenditures and spillovers, they don't really capture the intangibles of innovation like the new networks, the behavior change at different parts in the system. But we are now developing new methods, for example, like social network analysis. Does it really change the networks? But you're right, this also requires looking for better methods. I think they're not yet there, but also it requires a different attitude to what do you measure as success. Is it already sufficient as a project when you say we've learned a great deal of things? It was not a complete success, but we see some of the learnings being taken up in other places. Does that count as evidence for this project was a success? It also deals with the time lag. We had a project which came even before this one called Comfort Class Stable for pigs. So really making it like a really nice environment. That was, I think it started around the millennium, the change of the millennium. So that's about 10 years ago, 14 years ago. And I saw a couple of weeks ago an article in our university paper saying, evaluating what has come out of that. And basically they said, we now see that the comfort class table has not been realized anywhere. So if you would really measure that as a success, it's a complete failure. But they see many of the components, they have trickled down to the conventional system builders who have upgraded their system. So in that sense, it's a success. But that's sometimes very hard to measure at the end of the project. And so there's also a tension in a sense. And so I think this requires to be a bit more realistic about the time lag. And it also requires definitely developing new ways of measuring success. Beyond the traditional indicators, also in terms of number of field visits, number of farmers reached. They're inadequate anyway, but I hope that answers your question. Yeah. And you also see that in our government, they developed sometimes a quite relaxed attitude towards these types of initiatives, saying, hey, you just document very well what you do, you have some deliverables, but we don't tie you to preset indicators because we know it's not realistic. Okay, I think we're getting there. Another initiative a little bit similar to this cow power stuff is an organization. This is an organization, the other one was a project. This is an organization, and that's the thing. In Australia you might see this work being done, but they're much more connected to project, and then also sometimes the efforts dissolve afterwards. Project finished, the people go and do other stuff. In the Netherlands these are organizations which have existed for many years already. This courage thing, or courage, which is kind of a word joke because coup, they say it the French way, courage. And then Ku is cow, so it's kind of courageous cows. And this thing started, I think, 6 years ago, and it's still ongoing, and it has several projects. So it's not just one project, it's an organization doing projects. They really focus on the long term, and they have just, the mandate to think freely. So they are not tied to policy lines, they can do whatever they want. They do get government funding, it's 100% government and industry funding. And they initiate experiment and pilot projects. So, for example, they had a program on other uses for grass, saying, we might make another penny using our grass differently instead of just feeding the cows, or we might be faced with the situation at some point that our dairy sector is not profitable anymore because other players have come up in the world who do it more efficiently, or they can produce cheaper milk. And then we need to have some alternatives. And of course, some of this stuff is just, complete fantasy thinking, but at least it shows different directions for development. It's breaking out of the current thinking. So it's also about making connection with uncommon partners. They had initiatives in which they work with games developers, like Angry Birds and that kind of stuff, garden designers, to just come up with new, interesting concepts. So this is called the cow garden, and that's really about creating different concepts. It's a little bit similar to this cow power thing. So they work on energy and climate, closed cycle systems, animal health and welfare probably, entrepreneurship, nature and landscape. And so these are still topics of general concern. They are priorities, but within the priorities they have the mandate to work freely. And
We've got about 2 minutes to go.
okay,
Yeah.
then I'll move along. Well, this is a way of shaping research planning in a different way, making it much more supply chain oriented, the agenda setting process. This was an initiative in the organic sector, really saying, sector, here you have the money, but not just the farmers, but the whole sector, and all the peoples were sitting at a table articulating the priorities for research. But because all the players were present, they already were looking at how can we create the conditions to embed the research, so to prevent that it comes into a system in which it doesn't fit. So that was also achieved through making all the project participatory. And so there you had these networks setting the agenda, facilitated by this organization, and they were also supposed to translate the real demands. So not being very political, but just really having the real demands at the table and articulating that, and also gathering all the outputs in one central portal to prevent it from being fragmented. So the idea is, with all these different initiatives, some are really future oriented. You have to bring them down to practice with experiments. Then these pioneers can also start working, really making them sector proof, and that needs to be connected to agendas which contemplate both short-term stuff and long-term stuff. So this is kind of the philosophy behind it. So to wrap up, some general lessons for RD&E. You need to really consider the different complexity levels. An adoption and diffusion model will work well with maybe some more proven technologies. It won't work for complex issues. There you need co-production. You need different roles of research, different roles of extension, and moving more from the information provider to really a broker of innovation processes. You need different roles of research, not just problem solving or this research as the source of new knowledge, but advisory relationships, exchange relationships. There are all kinds of different ways of shaping research, and you should enable that by your incentive mechanisms. So at Wageningen, some researchers don't need to produce publications because they're more kind of scientific advisors. Extension, that's the two-way communication. You are already doing that, but in some countries they still have like this prescription mode, and you need networks of advisors being brokered by themselves. We've seen in some of the privatized countries like England that they started doing it themselves. They broker networks because that's how they best serve the client and add value. But you could also do that proactively if you see it's not happening. So What do you need for this? Different types of job perception. You need different types of criteria. Much of, especially the facilitation, brokering work, being the catalyst of innovation, the glue of the networks, the spark plug. It's really intangible often. You also need to really get clear who does what. There are some, because the roles become much more hybrid, so you can get conflicts also in terms of how can you still sell a clear product to a client. And maybe you should consider this innovation brokering as a more explicit capacity next to the RD&E system, as an innovation support system. We consider RD&E as the innovation support system within the innovation system, because those organizations have as their core focus supporting innovation, but they're not the innovation system itself. So also, if you go back to the intermediaries, I think these are pretty well catered for, but maybe this one is often neglected. So really it's about, RD&E, retooling, the facilitator role. It's about co-creation. It's about also a design approach. And it's also about having more networks of different advisors working together. So the conclusion, I think I did not make it in time. I'm sorry for that.
No, you've done well.
It's about AIS working. It's not about rebranding RD&E system. I looked at the slides. And it was just like, oh yeah, we are now an innovation system. No, you're not an innovation system, you're part of it. So RD&E system does not equal AIS. It's about finding a new position, recognizing this complexity of innovation, and that is innovation systems working. So maybe you still have to do some more work. And this also affects the funding organization, because you shift from being research funders to innovation funders. That might also mean that you start having kind of a risk funding scheme. In the Netherlands we have the SBIR scheme. I think that the SBIR scheme is the American one. We have innovation vouchers. They are not research vouchers. No, it's for farmers getting all the support they need. That can be research, it can be extension, it can also be a financial guy, it can be making a nice study trip to another country for a sector to enable farm level innovation. So that also requires different instruments by research funders or funding organizations like Dairy Australia. Okay, thank you for the attention. I hope it was useful. You can take some stuff home.
Lawrence, thanks for banging through very quickly. A lot of information in a short space of time.
Yeah.
And good that we got some questions in. I'm going to wrap it up because I'm mindful of the fact that the alliance partners have got an agenda they're working through as well. But for any people from DA who just want to continue any discussion with Lawrence or have any more questions, we can certainly pick it up.
They might flee, very rapidly. No, nothing. No, please. This guy, send him home.
Yeah. But look, I think for us, and again, Deppy and Melbourne Uni, thanks for sponsoring the visit, because I think it is just useful for us to have our sort of horizons broadened sometimes and our thinking challenged. And I even think, I agree with Lawrence when he said that really my take on it is that we've kind of we use the term agricultural innovation systems, and I went to that conference as just a new way of talking about RD&E without kind of stretching the thinking and understanding that RD&E is just a part of the innovation system. So, but I think the bit that I relate to most is, there's multiple actors in this, and we are all part of this. Yeah. So understanding how we work together and that need for collaboration and partnerships is just a key part of it all. But creating the right environment for it to work through is one of the challenges we've got, I think. So. But appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
And appreciate your time too, Alliance Partners. And it's been worthwhile.
Good luck. Now you can continue business as usual. Right? The left track of